So, Bob, what's the difference between how the Commission would handle the long-term fiscal outlook and what Paygo does for the long-term fiscal outlook?
Well, they really address different concerns. Paygo, which stands for Pay As You Go, tries to make sure that the situation doesn't get any worse. Even if we honored Paygo absolutely, we would still have an unsustainable situation. So it doesn't address, it's really not a deficit reduction tool. It is a tool for fiscal responsibility, but it's not a deficit reduction tool. The rationale for a commission is because we do have an unsustainable budget situation simply because of current policies that are already in place. So what the commission would do is try to find some set of policies on the revenue side or the spending side that would address that existing unsustainability of current programs. So you really need both, and it might not be a bad idea if they could work out some compromise where you would have both. One of the issues that comes up, though, when you're talking about Paygo, one of the sticking points has been what do you do about expiring tax cuts, because as we know, a large number of tax cuts enacted in 2001, 2003 are set to expire at the end of this year, and so how you treat them for purposes of Paygo has been kind of a point of contention between parties. Diane, you worked up on the Hill and had to confront this doing budget resolutions in the past. Could you talk a little bit about the Paygo issue and the tax cuts?
Since the Obama administration took office, they presented in their budget this notion of a baseline that's a current policy baseline, including the cost of extending most of the Bush tax cuts. And therefore, Congress has gone along with that notion and said, well, that's the baseline that we'll use for pay-as-you-go purposes. The reason why that's such an issue, a large issue in terms of the long-term outlook, is because under a current policy baseline, we are headed toward deficits by the end of the 10-year window that are still not sustainable. And they're exceeding 3%, 3 to 4% of GDP. They're more on the order of 5%. And so pay-as-you-go rules aren't going to really help us out if they allow most of the Bush tax cuts to be extended without offset. This is an issue because the Senate isn't very fond of the pay-as-you-go notion that the House has come up with and has indeed passed last year. And that was a definition of pay-as-you-go that exempted most of the Bush tax cuts in line with the president's budget. So I think that this is a big issue. Do we want some kind of pay-as-you-go? Is it better than no pay-as-you-go? So I think that'll be a big sticking point between the House and Senate strategies for imposing new fiscal discipline into the process.
There's been some talk about the administration revising its view. You blogged about that just before it was sort of speculated in the New York Times. How might that affect the equation?
Well, I think one strategy the administration could take, they could take the lead on this idea, is to give up on the notion that they'll extend all the full complement of the middle-class Bush tax cuts for all 10 years of the budget window. I mean, in their last budget, they proposed to permanently extend about $2 trillion over 10 years worth of tax cuts. And I think that a very easy way to reduce the cost of extending the tax cuts is to not extend them permanently in their budget, but
just
to extend them for 1 or 2 years. Not necessarily suggesting that they would all go away after the 1 or 2 years, but suggesting that we need more time to figure out what to do with the tax cuts, what to do with tax policy more generally in a more fundamental way, to re-examine whether there are ways of raising the revenue that we would achieve under current law where the tax cuts expire, but in a more efficient way, in a way that would be conducive to economic growth and would also be a progressive and fair tax system.
Now, I can imagine that if they put that revenue back in the budget that they took out last year, and we all congratulated them for being honest about showing the true cost of proposals and not assuming a revenue windfall, I think that a lot of us would probably be critical and say this is budget gimmickry. So you'd have to, I think, need something more, and when I think about it, I think that's where the idea of a commission might come in. If if you're just going to assume that the revenue is going to magically reappear, or that the deficit reduction is going to magically happen, then I think the administration would be open to a charge of just manipulating the baseline to make the numbers look better. But if you were to combine that with a serious commission proposal that would have to come up with some recommendations either on the spending or the tax side to make those deficit projections work, I think they could perhaps, they would have a lot stronger case to make there.
So, sure. Bob, would that be a presidential commission announced in the budget? Would it be working on a congressional commission? Is there a difference between the two that we see as important?
Well, I think that I imagine that's a prime issue that they're negotiating behind the scenes right now. But I think that the differences are, one of the key difference is whether or not a commission's proposals would be considered by the House and Senate. A presidential commission could not have that guarantee because the president can't guarantee that Congress is going to do anything. So if you have an executive branch commission, it's going to, by definition, be weaker than a commission enacted by Congress, because Congress could set rules and say this commission will waive certain procedural rules to allow this commission to vote, recommendations to be voted on. I do think you could probably work on some understanding, though, where you could probably put something in the budget resolution that there would be special instructions for consideration of the recommendations of a presidential commission. So it doesn't necessarily need to be either or, which is why I think if they don't feel the immediate need to put all of this on the debt limit right now, but take a little bit of time to sort of consider it in the context of the president's budget, you might be able to find some sort of package deal of some sort of Paygo regime that would satisfy the Ken Conrad and others in the Senate, that would have a commission that perhaps they could be, the Speaker Pelosi and others in the House would be more comfortable with. I think even the administration is going to want very tight discretionary spending caps, so I think you could probably put that into it as well. And so I think that there's a potential for a compromise there.